Welcome to Calumet Roundtable, a student-produced interviewing program at Purdue University Northwest. I'm your host, Lee Artz, and I'm joined today by my guest, Dr. Dick Simpson. Delighted to have you here today, Dr. Simpson. It's a very timely discussion today for two reasons. One, because we're in the middle of an election period, and two, because your book just has been published, Elections in the 21st Century. I understand it just came out a few weeks ago by Kansas University Press, so we're delighted to have you. I should say one more thing. They need to know that you're the department head of the Political Science Department at the University of Illinois, Chicago. So I'm happy you made the trip down to talk to us today.
I'm glad to be here.
Why don't we just start with your assessment of what elections mean and the state of the electoral process. I'm assuming we're talking about the United States primarily in this century.
Yeah, so what this book is about particularly is how to win elections, particularly at the local level, up to, say, Congress, using all the new techniques, but all the old methods as well. So we actually go back and quote Cicero and Abraham Lincoln on how to run elections. And then we do very fancy modern stuff like voter analytics and social media. And our intent is to both demystify the process for the persons who don't know as much, to help people who want to run participatory campaigns for public office, and to teach particularly students how the electoral process really works. What does it look like from the inside? And we correlate that with all the social science and political science studies that have been done that show what actually motivates voters. So it's written to be readable, it's written to be informative, and it's particularly written to help people conquer the election process as it runs today, as opposed to how it might have run 50 years ago.
Okay. One thing struck me, you kept saying we. Is this a...
It's a co-authored book.
Okay.
Another, one of my former graduate students, who's a professor or teacher at Loyola Academy, which is a high school in Chicago, and an adjunct professor at my university, University of Illinois at Chicago. And like myself, is a former elected official who's been in campaigns for decades. So it's equally authored, and it's written by two people who know it inside from slightly different perspectives. She won township elections in the suburbs. I won aldermanic elections and ran for Congress in Chicago itself.
Okay, how long ago was that when you last ran for Congress?
Well, I was alderman from 71 to 79. I led the opposition bloc against Richard J. Daley.
Yes.
And then I ran against the most powerful congressman in America, Dan Rostenkowski, before he went to prison. And came very close to defeating.
I guess it was good you didn't get elected.
I didn't get elected the second time. But he went to jail soon after, so yeah. It was a close contest there.
One of the phrases you used was participatory elections, and from my world, which is with community media, participatory democracy means something very specific, where the residents or the citizens of a particular area are the ones that actually make the decisions. What do you mean by participatory election?
As opposed to a sort of synthetic campaign in which we've manufacture a false candidate persona and spend millions or billions of dollars to then elect them, mostly by consultants and strategic media. Participatory campaigns are ones in which hundreds, if not thousands, of citizens are involved in electing the candidate, and in some cases in choosing the candidate that runs, but in every case electing it. You can see that in campaigns like, say, the Bernie Sanders campaign now for president, where you see so many people involved, but also most of the campaigns for president have a lot of people. But participatory campaigns locally, even for alderman or school board member, might have hundreds involved instead of just a small cadre of paid mercenaries running the campaign.
Yeah. I guess I should disclose I'm an elected official. I'm on the school board in my local
Congratulations.
community. And when we did what I would call a participatory election campaign, we began with our concerns, our issues, our topics, and then we looked to find somebody that had the skills and would be willing to do it. So the candidate was the outcome of nascent social movement.
That happens at the most local level.
Yes.
You know, like I say, city council, school board. But when you get to higher office, say to Congress, that's not usually done quite that way. The candidate, usually someone running for Congress or a high office has already held office, already has a following of hundreds or thousands of people. And I don't just mean Facebook friends, I mean actual people who've worked in campaigns or worked on issues. And so it works a little differently at different levels. But by participatory, we mean a candidate who inspires hundreds or thousands of people to work for their election. They may also have had some voice in shaping the platform. Again, that varies from the lowest level election, that's much more common. In the higher level elections, it tends not to be. Also, when people like yourself are elected that have involved people in the process, very frequently they will involve people in the governing. There are experiments in neighborhood government, there are experiments in places like Chicago in participatory budgeting campaign to spend some of the city's money on the local ward level. There are ways in which you can involve citizens, and in the 21st century we could go much further. In this book, we don't do that. We look at the challenges to democracy from some of the modern techniques that go bad, and we looked at how citizens can elect people. There are other of the works I've been part of. We look at how can you build democracy in the participatory sense of affecting policy.
Well, that would be one of my questions. Again, I don't necessarily want to get in a debate, but I'm coming from a whole different tradition of looking at the concept of participatory communication as opposed to participatory elections. And one question, and I realize you're mostly talking about local or congressional elections, but you talked about the Sanders campaign as being a participatory campaign, which poses the question of to what extent is it participatory rather than fandom or support, because I mean, Bernie has already said if he doesn't get the election, he's going to support Hillary, which is not what most of the people that are supporting Bernie are for as a backdoor to...
Well, but in the election process, I'll just use one example. Before the Iowa caucuses, using social media, the Sanders campaign organized 74 different House events in Chicago to call into the Iowa caucuses. We're taping this on the day of the New York primary. The Sanders campaign, again using social media, mobilized tens of thousands of people across the country to call millions of people in New York, urging them to vote for him. So that level of participation is different from just sitting and watching television and going to vote on election day. So.
Do you agree that that would also be a level, we almost need a barometer here for the viewer. One level of participation is where you're viewing and saying, go team, go. Another level of where you are calling in to vote for your favorite dancer. Right. Another level of participation would be where you actually get to dance and actually make the decisions. So we're not at that point. You're at this lower level of participation.
We would like to be at the other place, but we're trying to get it out of particularly manipulated elections using the techniques of the 21st century, which our book explores. Just to give an example with voter analytics, what voter analytics does is it takes information on your voting history, which elections have you voted in, and which party if you declare.
The NSA supplies that?
No, there's actually private firms that supply this, but it gets worse.
No, really, how, I mean, I'm being serious. How do you find out who I voted for in the past?
I can't tell who you voted for, but I can tell which primary you voted in. So I can tell if you're a Democrat or Republican or didn't vote.
Okay.
And I can tell if you voted for the last 3 elections. And I can add to that your credit card purchases, because that's private information that can be purchased. I can add to that any rumors about you that people have, and I can then come and ask you yourself, will you support my candidate on election day?
And you can use social media as well.
Well, I can do that to contact you once I have you.
Well, even to find out my
I could look at your profile, to some extent. That isn't already as prepackaged, however, so that's hard. So for instance, in the Obama campaigns of particularly 2012, they had a barometer or scale from 0 to 100. They scored people based on this information. Would you be likely to support Barack Obama or not? If your score was 65 or higher, someone came to visit you. What that does is, communities differ in sizes across the country, so I'll use a Chicago ward as an example. Chicago ward has 55,000 people, maybe 20,000 of them are voters, a lot of them are children or not registered. Yeah. With voter analytics, I can cut that number that we need to contact down to 10,000. Now I'm going to need 100, 200 people to contact those 10,000. They're in families, so I don't have to talk to each of them. So I've already got it down to 5,000. Yep. So it actually becomes a manageable task to contact everyone who is potentially my voter. I don't care who the other people are. Yes. They can have a cold, forget to vote election day. But I'm going to concentrate just on finding my voters. If I find my voters, I only have to get them to show up election day to win. I don't need 50% of the vote. I don't need 50% of the people who are voters. All I need is 50% who show up election day. And there are ways to mobilize people to bring that about. And then you see that in some campaigns, and on other campaigns you don't. The Trump campaign, for instance, in comparison to the Sanders, Trump is equally rallying people up, but he's doing it differently. He's sending tweets. With 5,000 tweets, he was able to get 85 million conversations on the various social media. He did not have an army of volunteer workers like, say, the Sanders campaign, and I'm just using the two extremes because it's easy to make quick comparisons.
In both cases, to me, it just illustrates in both cases my concern with what we understand as participation. Because if I'm a candidate and I already know somebody's supporting me, I'm not really entering in a conversation with what they want or they don't want. I'm only contacting the ones that are going to campaign for me. Whether I do that with tweets or whether I do that with
But in most cases, even if you're like-minded to whatever kind of candidate I am, left, right, whichever, I still have to motivate you. I have to get a message, talking about communication. I have to get a message to you, and probably I have to receive enough of a message back from you that there's
pursue that, right,
to be able to make that work. And that's why social media can be so effective.
Well, either way, we've got a structure, which is what we also have here, which means we have to take a short break. We'll be back with Calumet Roundtable in just a couple seconds. Stay with us. Welcome back to Calumet Roundtable, the Purdue Northwest student-produced interviewing show. I'm your host, Lee Artz, and my guest today is Dr. Dick Simpson from the University of Illinois at Chicago. And we're talking about his most recent book, Elections in the 21st Century. This book, it sounds to me like it's a bit historical, a bit of a political commentary, but also it's partly a primer to prepare people or to at least give people the tools to be able to learn the ropes or to at least understand in broad strokes what it is to run in a local election.
Yeah, the title when I began writing the first book in 1972 was Winning Elections, a handbook in participatory politics. And it told how to create both elections and how to create the political organizations to sustain between elections. And this new book, Winning Elections in the 21st Century, does essentially the same thing without the same subtitle. Its intent is that if you wanted to run for state legislature, well, you would know something about it, but you might not know everything that would cause you both to win and would cause you to win with people power rather than just sheer money power. And so the book is meant to be a handbook in that sense. It's also meant to help people decode what's going on in this 2016 election that they may not understand. I mean, they can listen to the rhetoric and see the TV version, but what's really going on behind the scenes. And it's meant to help students understand how to be able to participate in electoral politics, because electoral politics controls a lot of the final decision making. Who you put in power is going to determine some of what the decisions are.
To what extent does the structure of electoral politics make that possible or obstruct that possibility?
The election system leaves open the option. The worst new thing is Citizens United, because Citizens United court decisions and the ones following mean both that we have unlimited money involved in elections and we have dark money. We don't know where the money comes from if they use the PAC method of funding. And so that is, we end the book with challenges to democracy, and probably the biggest single challenge is this dark money and too much money. So for instance, I'll again use Illinois as an example. In Illinois, if you want to run for alderman in Chicago, you have to raise $250,000. Same if you want to run for the state legislature.
You have to raise that because that's
because that's what it costs to get your message to the voters with the different systems involved. If you want to run for Congress, it's more than $1 million. The average is $1.6 million. If you want to run for governor or senator, it's tens of millions of dollars, and so on up to the presidential level, which is going to be, we've already spent more than $1 billion on the presidential election so far in the campaigns.
Would it be fair to say in each one of those steps prepares the person to run for the next level, because it's kind of a vetting system? If you haven't shown to the party structure that you can win on the at least above the local level, you're not going to get a congressional, an Illinois congressional seat, and you're not going to then be able to run for the House of Representatives because you haven't demonstrated
that you can do all the things that are required, not just raising the money, but
and not just
being
getting elected,
being a charismatic candidate, being able to mobilize people in support of you and so forth. Yes, it is a proving ground, and correctly so. On the other side, you know, one of these candidates like Trump might win this time who's never held elected office. In general, it's a bad idea because they haven't learned the craft of government. Just like campaigns are a craft like carpenter or plumbing, there's a way to do it. You wouldn't hire a plumber who simply read a book about plumbing. You shouldn't be hiring high elected officials, governors, senators,
on the other
and so
hand,
forth.
I wouldn't want to hire somebody that's going to build a prison when I want to live in a house.
Right, so you
I'm
want some control over it.
I'm not going to support one of the two political parties if they're primarily prison builders.
And there's a good argument that we ought to transform the political parties.
And that's one of my questions, because I was actually trying to get at something else when you said it costs you need $250,000 to run as an alderman, but those are nonpartisan elections. Is that true?
Those are nonpartisan elections, but everybody knows the party affiliation of the candidate's just not on the ballot.
And I also understand, I believe it's true in Indiana as well, that in Illinois, if you want to run for office, if you run for office as a Democrat or Republican and you get the party support and have some money, you're going to be on the ballot. But if you want to run as a Green Party, or lo and behold as the Workers' Alliance or some others, you don't get on the ballot without, there's a lot of other restrictions that I would argue interferes with participation, because you can only participate if you're in this particular channel.
I agree. Third parties do not work in the United States, and we don't in our book talk about all the reasons, but there are, in political science, we certainly do.
Right. Well, they don't. Yes, but they don't work because they're not allowed, largely. Not
they're
because
illegal. I mean, we've outlawed third parties. I mean, we didn't say it when we wrote the laws.
Well, we didn't.
No, but I mean, even in writing the laws,
people that are designing the rules and
they designed
regulations
rules for winner-take-all, majority.
Right.
And
that's a very convenient
series of other problems, petitions.
Right.
In how many petition signatures does it take? Well, it takes much more if you're a third-party candidate than if you're a regular party candidate, just to give an example.
Yeah,
but in our case, what we do is train people to overcome any of those hurdles if they have enough popular support.
Including running as an independent or as a third
in terms
party.
of getting on the ballot.
Yes.
In other words, if they have to have petitions, We will teach you how to get enough petitions to get on the ballot.
Make sure that the person that signs is in the proper county and the
You
proper...
have to do all of that
yes,
stuff.
you have to do all of that stuff.
Yeah, we don't go into that much detail, but I also have a series of videotapes on my webpage of the best consultants for independent politics in Chicago, which means basically in the country, for those things that can give more in-depth instruction. Our intent is to make it if there's someone with popular support with good ideas, to make it possible for them to get elected in the 21st century.
And I should repeat that this book is Elections in the 21st Century.
Winning elections in
winning elections. Okay, winning elections in the 21st century. It's just been out for a month, and that it should be available. If not, you can find it Kansas University Press. So, in addition to the videos and the blog, they could get the book. So I wanted to make that clear. Can I ask you another question? You mentioned before, it just struck me that in a precinct, I think you said 55,000 voters. Is that
in a ward?
In a ward. That's the they do
That's
it
the
by
number of residents.
Residents, and then
and a precinct in Chicago, and precincts is a term that differs in different
cities,
states.
Yes.
But in Chicago, there would be 50 precincts in a ward. Each of them would have about 400 registered voters, give or take.
Okay, so if we have 55,000 residents, it's not voters, and it's not even voting age. How? I mean, is there some? You talked a lot of statistics, but I just wondered about how many people are eligible to vote in a precinct, for instance.
In a precinct in Chicago, it's usually about 350. In a ward, it's about 55,000. We're a city of roughly 3 million, 2.8 million.
Okay.
And so we, for governing purposes, have divided the system up, but it also has very direct political consequences, and that's true you may not be using exactly our structure, but the structure you're using is affecting the election process.
Yes. Very good. One of the things that just strikes me is, again, I'm sorry I can't seem to get over the level of participation, but oftentimes it seems in an election is that there's a significant number of people that are eligible to vote but aren't able to vote. Either they're a felon or they're an immigrant or they haven't registered, and then that might be as many as a third of the population that isn't eligible to vote.
Well, but it's much worse than that. In the last election in Illinois, less than 35% of the people who were registered voted.
Right.
In a presidential election, it's rare for the number who are registered for 60% to vote. In the most important election we hold, not just for president, but because so many other offices, there are 540,000 elected offices in the United States. We elect a lot of those in the presidential year, almost half of them.
Yep.
So there ought to be more than 60% of the people voting, and we could get into all the reasons or not, but my concern is if you're running, you think what you stand for is the most important program or policy, and other people agree with you, how do you get elected so you actually get to carry out that policy that people want? And that's what our book is about.
Overcoming the obstacles in an ethical, positive,
honest way.
Yes.
Which engages the most people and gives the most hope of transforming the system so democracy could be built.
Which is an absolutely admirable effort, and it's good that somebody has a primer to be able to do that. We probably have time for one more question, and it's something that you mentioned early on, is that things are different now than they might have been 20 or 30 years ago with what are the obstacles or opportunities in running the elections. And one of the things you mentioned was technology. And I thought maybe you could just share with us what you, in the book, or what you discovered about what are the either handicaps or opportunities that come with the new social media and other technology for the electoral process.
So first of all, with voter analytics, we can do targeting and micro-targeting and nano-targeting, which means we can select which voters to contact. But then we can use a series of methods to get in touch with them, and those include websites, those include all of the social media like Facebook and Twitter and so forth, so that we can manage, if we have a good candidate and a good message, to get that message to enough voters and to know that they will show up election day and that we will win the election. We can do that with much more precision than we could do when I first ran in 1971. Back then, we had poll sheets that we had to use. Now we have computer printouts. We can actually put on a cell phone all the information the precinct volunteer needs to contact the voters and to report to headquarters whether or not they're a plus voter or going to vote for us or they're going to vote against us.
It reminds me of the thing you said before about the ethical and honest way to run as opposed to just doing it manipulative. It would seem like that technology would also allow the reverse.
It
that
allows
the candidate
both,
or the campaign.
That's how we end the book. You get a
Yes.
choice. We have new technology and new methods. That technology and methods could
target me, or
could allow you to participate in a way to change the nation. And the same is true, although the book is not about it, about new ways to participate. You could imagine using the media for town hall meetings and participation that would allow very constant input on policies by citizens. You can imagine a way to simply dump stuff on the internet and keep them out of the process.
Actually, I do. My advisor for my PhD wrote several works on John Dewey, and he talked about the democracy of town halls, and he also talked the philosophy of self-realization. And John Peters is his name, and he argued that we no longer have town halls, so that possibility of the ideal democracy isn't there. But my response would be what you just said. With technology, we actually have the opportunity to have town hall-like exchanges, because thousands of people can actually communicate what they want, what they're interested in. Conceivably, you could even allow people to vote, just like you do on Dancing with the Stars. You could vote on whether or not they should invade Iraq or somewhere else. Yes.
So we're facing a choice of whether we're going to have more democracy or less, and the choice is going to be determined by who we elect, and we can't just wait and hope to elect people, white knights, to do it. We have to have it as a participatory process from the beginning, or the results will be bad.
Excellent, thank you. I wish we had more time to talk. As you said, maybe we'll schedule another one, but that's all the time we have for the program today. Thank you for joining me, Lee Artz, on the Calumet Roundtable, and thank you, Dr. Simpson, for coming and joining us. We'll see you next time. Thanks.